The envelope lay on my cracked kitchen table like a death sentence, its crisp white mocking the worn linoleum beneath it. Hospital bills, another one. My name, Leo Vance, was scrawled at the top, but the true recipient of this financial gut punch was my younger sister, Clara. She was 15, vibrant even through the haze of chemotherapy, but without the next payment, the doctors had been clear. Treatment would stop. The words echoed in my head, a chilling mantra. Without payment, treatment would stop. I was a trucker, a lone wolf on the asphalt ribbons of the Appalachian Mountains, but even the open road couldn't outrun the debt that clung to me like exhaust fumes. Every mile I drove, every load I hauled felt like spitting into a hurricane. Clara was my world. Our parents had passed years ago, leaving me, the elder brother, to navigate the world with a scrawny, brilliant kid sister by my side. Now her life, quite literally, depended on me finding $10,000 I didn't have. My savings were gone, my credit maxed, and the only thing left was the desperate, gnawing hunger in my gut. I tried everything. Calling old friends, reaching out to distant relatives, even swallowing my pride and walking into a loan shark's den. Each door slammed shut, each phone call met with sympathetic but firm rejections. The clock was ticking, and Clara's pale face, her weakening smile, haunted my waking hours and invaded my fitful sleep. That's when I heard the whispers. Not the kind that chill your blood, not yet. These were the hushed, almost mythical tales in greasy spoon diners and truck stops along I-40. Whispers of a man named Silas Thorne, a logistics operator with a reputation darker than a moonless night in the hollows. They said he dealt in strange cargo, asked no questions and paid in cash, a lot of cash. Desperation, as they say, makes a man do strange things. It certainly led me to a grimy alley behind what looked like a condemned textile mill on the outskirts of Asheville. Silas Thorne's office was even worse than I'd imagined. The door, a blotched slab of peeling paint, creaked open to reveal a single, flickering fluorescent light struggling against the oppressive gloom. The air was thick with the smell of old paper, dust, and something else. Something faintly metallic like rain on rust. Boxes, stacked haphazardly to the ceiling, leaned precariously, filled with God knew what. A single, scarred wooden desk sat in the middle of the room, illuminated by the sickly glow. Behind it, Silas Thorne himself emerged from the shadows. He was a gaunt man, his face a roadmap of sharp angles and hollows. His eyes, though, were what truly held me. They were the color of stagnant pond water, yet held an unsettling glint of intelligence, of something ancient and knowing. He didn't offer a handshake, just a thin, humorless smile that barely reached his eyes. "Leo Vance," he rasped, his voice like gravel scraping against stone. "I hear you're in a bind." I swallowed, my throat suddenly dry. "I need a job, a good-paying one." He leaned back in his creaking chair, the sound amplified in the suffocating silence. "I have a job. Single haul, Asheville to Knoxville. Tonight." He paused, letting the words hang in the air. $10,000. My jaw nearly hit the floor. 10,000? For one night? It was enough. It was more than enough. My mind raced, Clara's face shining in the sudden rush of hope. But the price was too good, the circumstances too off. "What's the catch?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. Silas's smile widened, revealing teeth that were just a little too long, a little too sharp. "No catch, Mr. Vance, just rules. 3 of them. And they are non-negotiable." He picked up a well-worn ledger from his desk, running a finger along its dusty cover. The light caught something on his fingernail, a dark, almost black stain. I pushed the thought away. "Rule number 1, he began, his voice dropping, becoming almost hypnotic. "You make no stops. For any reason, Not for gas, not for a bladder break, not for a flat tire. You drive, and you do not stop until you reach the drop-off point in Knoxville. A chill traced its way down my spine. That was already unusual. Long hauls often required stops. Rule number 2, he continued, his eyes fixed on mine, unwavering. Keep the windows up. All the way up. And ignore any tapping. On the glass, on the body of the truck, anywhere. You hear it, you pretend you don't. You do not acknowledge it, you do not look. My blood ran cold. Tapping on the truck? What in God's name was he hauling? A sudden image of something pale and desperate pressing against the glass flashed through my mind. And finally, Silas said, his voice now a low, chilling whisper. Rule number 3. This is the most important. If the engine dies, if the truck breaks down, you pray for sunrise. You pray it comes fast. The air in the room seemed to thicken, pressing down on me. Pray for sunrise? What was out there in the dark that made sunrise a salvation? My mind screamed at me to run, to sprint out of that dingy office and never look back. This wasn't just strange. It was terrifying. It reeked of something ancient, something predatory, lurking in the shadows of the Appalachian night. But then I saw Clara's face again, her brave smile, her fragile grip on life. $10,000. Her life. Against an ominous job, strange rules, and the cold dread creeping up my spine. "Do we have a deal, Mr. Vance?" Silas asked, his voice cutting through my internal debate. He already knew the answer. He could see the desperation in my eyes, the ghost of Clara's fate hanging over me. I clenched my jaw, the metallic tang of fear in my mouth. "We have a deal," I managed, the words tasting like ash. The chill had turned into a deep, bone-aching cold. I had just sold a piece of myself for Clara, and I had a terrifying feeling I was about to find out exactly what I'd bought. The cold steel of the truck door felt heavy in my hand, but it was nothing compared to the weight in my chest. $10,000. One night. 3 rules that scratched at the edge of sanity. I tried to push Silas Thorne's unsettling smile from my mind, along with the lingering scent of that awful office, but it clung to me like a phantom chill. Clara's face, pale but hopeful in my imagination, was the only thing that kept my feet moving towards the lot where my rig, a weathered freightliner named Old Bessie by me, sat waiting. I ran through my pre-trip checks like a ritual, each tug, each tap, a desperate attempt to ground myself in the familiar. Tires, brakes, lights, fuel. I topped off the tank, the diesel fumes, a familiar comfort that did little to calm the frantic flutter in my stomach. Then I walked around to the trailer Silas had pointed out. It was a standard 40-foot dry van, unremarkable in every way, save for the fact that it was sealed tighter than a tomb. No visible locks, just heavy-duty reinforced latches that looked like they'd been welded shut. My mind went back to Silas's rules. No stops for any reason. What kind of cargo couldn't handle a quick pit stop? And why did it matter if I looked at tapping on the windows? As I finished my inspection, a shadow detached itself from the deeper gloom of the lot. He was an old man, his clothes a patchwork of rags, his white hair a matted halo around a face etched with a lifetime of hard living, and perhaps something worse. His eyes, though, were what caught me, wide, bloodshot, and frantic, like a cornered animal's. He shuffled towards me, his gait uneven, muttering to himself. "Hey, buddy," I said, trying to sound friendly, trying not to show the unease that was already creeping up my spine. "You lost?" He didn't answer directly. He just raised a trembling finger, pointing at my truck, specifically at the sealed trailer. His voice was a raw, croaking whisper, like autumn leaves skittering across pavement. "You're driving coffins, son. 6 of them. Marked for the earth, but not by it. My breath hitched. Coffins? My gaze darted to the trailer, then back to the old man. My heart hammered against my ribs. What are you talking about? He shuffled closer, his eyes drilling into mine with an unnerving intensity. Tell him, boy. When you meet him, tell him about Morwenna. She'll know. She always knows. His voice rose to a frantic crescendo, his words tumbling out like loose stones. Don't let them take you. Don't let them have your light. Just then, Silas Thorne materialized out of the darkness behind the man, moving with a surprising swiftness for someone so gaunt. His eyes were wide, a flicker of something close to panic momentarily stripping away his usual cold composure. Get out of here, you old fool! Silas snarled, his voice losing its gravelly calm, becoming sharp, laced with genuine fear. He grabbed the old man by the arm, his grip surprisingly forceful, and practically threw him back into the shadows. He's harmless, Silas said, turning back to me, his face already recomposing into its usual mask. His voice was strained, a little too loud. Just a local vagrant. Drinks too much. I looked from the retreating figure of the old man, who stumbled away muttering, to Silas's carefully neutral face. Harmless? That wasn't harmless. That was terrified. And Silas, the man who dealt in dark reputations, had been genuinely rattled. The word coffins echoed in my ears, making the sealed trailer feel suddenly heavy, ominous. But what choice did I have? Clara. $10,000. I shook off the unsettling encounter, told myself it was just a crazy old man. It had to be. With a final deep breath, I climbed into the cab of old Bessie. The engine rumbled to life, a familiar, comforting growl that momentarily pushed back the encroaching dread. I pulled out of the grimy lot, the city lights of Asheville slowly receding in my rearview mirror. My route was laid out, I-40 west, then a turn onto Route 66. Locally, they called that stretch Blood Hollow. Even before tonight, I knew why. It was a desolate ribbon of asphalt, carving its way through the deepest, darkest parts of the Appalachian Mountains. Few towns, even fewer lights, just towering trees that clawed at the night sky and the oppressive silence of the ancient peaks. As I drove, the moon, a sliver of bone in the ink-black sky, cast long, distorted shadows that danced along the roadside. The air grew colder, the scent of pine and damp earth filling the cab. I tried to tune into a local radio station, anything to fill the void, but the signal grew weaker and weaker. Static crackled, then faded to a hiss, then absolute silence. My only company was the rhythmic hum of the diesel engine and the rush of wind against the cab. I was truly alone out here. It was then, somewhere deep in the heart of Blood Hollow, that I first heard it. It wasn't on the radio, which was dead. It wasn't a tap on the window, though I instinctively flinched, remembering rule number 2. It was fainter, like a breath drawn across the very fabric of the night. A whisper, impossibly close, yet disembodied. It seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere, a cold tendril of sound curling around my ears, chilling me to the bone. Turn back. The voice was soft, melodic, yet laced with an undeniable undercurrent of sorrow and warning. It was undeniably female, and it held a strange, ancient resonance that vibrated through my very bones. My foot instinctively eased off the accelerator. My heart pounded a frantic rhythm against my ribs. I gripped the steering wheel, knuckles white. Was I losing it? The stress, the exhaustion, the old man's words. It had to be my imagination playing tricks. Just the wind, or the hum of the tires, or perhaps the lonely echoes of the mountains themselves. I shook my head, trying to clear the phantom whisper, trying to rationalize the impossible. But the words lingered, a cold, unsettling premonition. Turn back. Too late. I was already too far in. Clara was waiting. and the darkness of Blood Hollow was just beginning to stir. The whispered warning, "Turn back," clawed at the edges of my sanity for miles. I tried to dismiss it, to rationalize it as the wind playing tricks, or my own strained nerves conjuring phantoms in the desolate stretch of Route 66 they called Blood Hollow. But the deeper I drove into the Appalachian night, the more the trees seemed to press in, their gnarled limbs like skeletal fingers reaching from the inky blackness. The silence in the cab, now absolute since the radio signal died, was punctuated only by the drone of old Bessie's engine and the frantic thumping of my own heart. This wasn't just a drive. It was becoming a waking nightmare. I gripped the steering wheel, knuckles white, my eyes scanning the road ahead, then darting to the mirrors. There was nothing, just the endless tunnel of pines. My mind, however, kept replaying the old man's frantic warning about coffins and the chill in Silas's eyes. I told myself it was paranoia, the cost of desperation. Then I saw her. She stood on the shoulder, barely illuminated by my headlights, a stark, unsettling figure against the backdrop of the dark forest. A woman, or what looked like one. She was wearing a wedding dress, once white, now stained and ragged, clinging to her like a shroud. Her dark hair was matted, obscuring most of her face, but I could make out pale skin. Even from a distance, she seemed wrong, too still, too spectral. My foot instinctively hesitated over the brake, but Silas's first rule hammered into my head: make no stops for any reason. I pressed down on the accelerator instead, old Bessie's engine roaring as I sped past her, the wind from my truck whipping her tattered veil. I dared a glance into the passenger side mirror, a quick, fleeting look, just to confirm what I'd seen. Damn. And that's when I saw it. Her head snapped up, following my truck's receding form. The matted hair fell away from her face, and what I saw in the distorted glass of the mirror made every drop of blood in my veins turn to ice. Her features contorted, not in pain or sorrow, but into something unspeakably vile. Her mouth stretched wide, wider than any human jaw could allow, revealing not teeth, but sharpened points, like broken glass. Her eyes, sunken and black, burned with an ancient, predatory malice. The beautiful, tragic bride transformed into a monstrous snarl, a twisted parody of human despair. I gasped, a raw, involuntary sound, and tore my gaze away from the mirror, my heart slamming against my ribs. My foot mashed the accelerator to the floor, pushing old Bessie to her absolute limit. The image burned behind my eyelids, making me question if it was real, if the exhaustion and fear were playing such cruel tricks. But the cold dread that settled into my bones felt too real, too visceral. I could still see the flash of those eyes, the impossible contortion of her face. Rule number 2, keep the windows up and ignore any tapping. She hadn't tapped, but seeing her, I understood why. The road became a blur. I drove like a man possessed, trying to outrun the phantom bride, trying to outrun the very darkness of Blood Hollow. My breath hitched in my throat, shallow and ragged. I told myself it was just a trick of the light, a figment of my overwrought imagination, but the memory of that snarl clung to me, a sickening premonition. Minutes later, perhaps an hour, time had blurred into a terrifying, endless stretch. Another impossible apparition materialized. This time, he was running alongside my truck. Oh, a kid, a teenager, no older than 17, dressed in a faded high school letterman jacket, the kind with a large M patched onto the chest. His hair was disheveled, plastered to his forehead with sweat, and his face was etched with pure, unadulterated terror. He kept pace with old Bessie, somehow, impossibly, even as I pushed 60, then 70 miles an hour. "Hey! Hey!" he screamed, his voice thin and desperate, lost in the roar of the diesel engine. He was pounding on the passenger window, a rapid-fire rhythm of desperate fists against the glass. Tap! 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 My eyes were glued to him. My chest tightened, every muscle screaming at me to slow down, to help this terrified kid. He looked so real, so impossibly human, pleading for help. He matched my speed effortlessly, his legs pumping in a blur, his face pressed close to the glass, eyes wide with horror. And then I saw his eyes. Eyes. They weren't human. Not quite. Beneath the terror, a faint, unsettling glow emanated from their depths, like dying embers in a fire pit, pulsing with a faint, internal light. They seemed to burn with a desperate, unearthly energy. My mind screamed at me. Rule number 2, ignore any tapping. Do not look. But I couldn't tear my gaze away from those glowing eyes, from the frantic, silent plea in them. He was running, never losing ground, his hand slamming against the glass, begging me for something I couldn't give. A cold, wet sweat broke out on my forehead. This was real. Whatever was out here, it wasn't human. My hands clamped harder on the wheel, my foot frozen on the accelerator. I couldn't stop. I couldn't look. I just had to drive. The boy's face, his glowing eyes, his desperate pounding, etched themselves into my memory. He ran alongside me for what felt like an eternity, but was probably only a few nightmarish minutes, before the road curved, and he was swallowed back into the inky blackness behind me, his frantic tapping fading into the general roar of the truck. I was shaking, trembling so hard the steering wheel vibrated in my hands. My rational mind was shattered. The phantom bride, the impossible running boy with glowing eyes. Blood Hollow was not just a desolate road, it was something else entirely, and I was trapped right in the middle of it. Then, through the ringing silence of the cab, the CB radio crackled to life. I flinched, my heart leaping into my throat. Static, then a voice, deep, calm, and utterly chilling. Vance. Progress report. It was Silas, his voice clear as a bell, despite the dead airwaves and the hundreds of miles separating us. How do you know? I stammered, my voice hoarse, barely a whisper. There was a faint, almost imperceptible chuckle on the other end. I know everything, Mr. Vance. Just keep moving. The night's young, and your cargo is anxious to arrive. The line went dead, returning to the hiss of static, then silence. A new layer of horror settled over me. Silas Thorne wasn't just a logistics operator, he was something else. He knew. He was watching. And he knew exactly what was out here. The sealed trailer behind me felt less like a cargo hold, and more like a rolling prison, or a rolling coffin. The old man's words echoed. You're driving coffins. I was no longer just a trucker in debt. I was a puppet, dancing on strings held by an unseen hand, driving through a nightmare, with a very real, very terrifying payment to make. And the night was indeed very, very young. The last apparition, the boy with the glowing eyes, had faded into the inky blackness behind me, but the memory of his desperate, silent plea against the window was burned into my retinas. My hand still trembled on the steering wheel, and the air in the cab felt thick with an unseen presence. Silas Thorne's voice, impossibly clear over the dead CB, echoed his chilling knowledge. I know everything, Mr. Vance. He knew. He was watching. The feeling of being a rat in a maze, trapped and observed, was almost as terrifying as the phantoms themselves. I pushed old Bessie harder, hoping to outrun the fear, to outrun Blood Hollow. But then, without warning, the truck coughed. A violent shudder ripped through the frame, rattling my teeth. The engine sputtered, the familiar growl replaced by a ragged wheeze, like a dying beast. My heart leaped into my throat. Rule number 3. If the engine dies, pray for sunrise. My mind screamed, not yet, not here. I fought the wheel, desperately trying to keep old Bessie on the asphalt. The truck bucked again, lights flickering. Up ahead, barely visible through the oppressive darkness, a faint, flickering neon sign pierced the gloom. Gas and grub. It was ancient, half collapsed, but it signified a pull-off. An abandoned gas station, certainly, but a place to stop, to try and save the rig before it died completely. With a final, agonizing lurch, Old Bessie sputtered to a stop at the edge of the cracked asphalt lot. The engine cut out, plunging the cab into an unnerving silence, broken only by the ticking of cooling metal. My breath hitched. It was dead. But then, with a soft, almost imperceptible groan, the engine caught again, idling roughly, a frail flicker of life. It was just enough. Just enough to pull into the abandoned station, to park under the skeletal remains of the rusted canopy. The faint glow of the moon, now half obscured by clouds, cast long, distorted shadows across the silent, decaying pumps. I sat there, gripping the wheel, sweat trickling down my spine. The engine hadn't died dead, not completely. But it had forced me to stop, and I was here, in the middle of nowhere with a looming sense of dread. My eyes darted to the trailer in my rearview mirror. Sealed. Full of God knew what. The old man's words. "You're driving coffins, son. The bride. The boy." This wasn't just a breakdown. This was a setup. I felt it in my gut. A cold, hard certainty. My curiosity, a dangerous thing at the best of times, combined with the suffocating dread of breaking Silas's rules, gnawed at me. I couldn't just sit here. I had to know. Had to see. Clara's life was on the line, and I was driving a nightmare. I unlatched the door, the groan of the old rig mingling with the creak of the cab door as I swung it open. The night air was heavy, damp with the smell of pine and decay. I grabbed my trusty flashlight from the glove compartment, its beam cutting a shaky path through the darkness. Every shadow seemed to stretch, to twist into something monstrous. The silence was absolute, save for the frantic pounding of my own heart. I walked to the rear of the trailer, the beam of my flashlight playing over the reinforced latches. They looked impossibly secure, welded shut, just as I'd seen earlier. But as I ran my hand over the cold metal, my fingers brushed against a small, almost invisible seam. A hairline crack in the weld, or perhaps a section where the reinforcement wasn't quite complete. It wasn't an easy opening, but it was an opening. Taking a deep breath, I braced myself. With a grunt, I put my shoulder to the seam, pushing, pulling, twisting, trying every angle. The metal groaned, protesting. My muscles screamed. But finally, with a loud, sickening crack, the latch gave way. A thin gap opened. I wrestled with the heavy door, slowly, agonizingly, until it swung inward with a drawn-out screech that seemed to echo through the hollows. The interior of the trailer was swallowed in absolute blackness. The air inside was stale, heavy, and carried a faint, sweet, cloying odor I couldn't quite place. I shone my flashlight inside, and the beam caught them, 6 of them, lined up perfectly, side by side, like macabre gifts. They weren't just ordinary wooden boxes, these were coffins, masterfully crafted, as the outline said. Dark, polished wood, gleamed faintly in the flashlight beam, adorned with intricate swirling carvings that twisted into unsettling, almost predatory patterns. Each one was sealed, tightly clamped shut, as if whatever lay inside was meant to stay there, or was trying to get out. My stomach churned. The old man's words. "You're driving coffins." He'd been right. But why? And what was inside? Fear battled with an unholy curiosity. I had to know. I approached the nearest coffin, my hands clammy. My flashlight beam danced over the polished surface, catching a small, thin volume tucked into a recessed groove on the side. A ledger. Not leather-bound, but something older, rougher, like dried animal hide. My fingers trembled as I pulled it free. The pages were yellowed, brittle. Scrawled inside, in a spidery, elegant hand, was a list of names. A long, chilling list. My flashlight hovered over them, and a name jumped out at me. Caleb. The terrified boy with the glowing eyes who'd pounded on my window. And just below it, Isolde, the phantom bride in the wedding dress. The names kept coming. A roll call of recent missing persons cases I'd seen flashes of on the news in truck stops. Faces that had haunted posters pinned to bulletin boards. People who had vanished without a trace in these very mountains, and then, near the bottom of a fresh page, scrawled in the same unsettling hand, was a name that made my blood run cold. Silas Thorne. And next to it, a blank space. A horrifying, expectant blank space. A cold certainty washed over me. These weren't coffins for the dead. They were for the disappeared. And Silas was involved in collecting them. Or worse. Just as the full, awful implication crashed down on me, my phone vibrated in my pocket. The sudden, jarring sound made me jump. I pulled it out, heart-hammering. An unknown number. I almost didn't answer. But something compelled me. "Vance," Silas's voice crackled, devoid of the static from the CB, eerily clear, as if he were standing right beside me. "Trouble with the truck, I hear?" There was no question in his tone, only cold assertion. He knew. "How do you—" I started, my voice hoarse. "Never mind how I know," he cut me off, his voice dropping to a low, chilling purr. "The point is, you've stopped. And you've opened the trailer. Teask, Vance. Breaking rules can be costly. What are you doing with these?" I demanded, my voice rising, fueled by a mixture of terror and rage. "What are these coffins? Who are these people?" "Cargo, Mr. Vance, important cargo. But let's talk about something more important to you." His voice grew colder, sharp as a razor blade. "Clara. Clara Vance, isn't it? 15 years old. Currently in room 307, Wing B, Mercy Hospital, Asheville. Cancer. Non-Hodgkin lymphoma, stage 3. Pale, tired, but still fighting. Though she's due for her next round of treatment tomorrow morning, isn't she? Without it." He paused, letting the silence stretch, letting the implication hang heavy in the air. "Without it, she won't be fighting for long." My blood ran to ice. He knew. He knew everything. He wasn't just watching me, he was watching Clara. My sister, my fragile, brave sister. He had a hold over me, a twisted, unbreakable chain. "What do you want?" I whispered, my voice barely audible. "Just for you to complete the job, Vance," he purred. "Or you'll understand just how desperate a father can be when his own child is on the brink." And then, a terrifying, grotesque image flared in my mind, unbidden, like a corrupted memory that wasn't my own. It was a vision, sharp and horrifying. Silas Thorne, younger, his face contorted with the same desperate grief I now felt. He was leaning over a bed, a young girl, his daughter Elara, lying pale and withered. And in his hand, a vial filled with a dark, viscous, unnatural substance. He forced it to her lips, his eyes burning with a terrible resolve. As she swallowed, her skin seemed to change, her eyes fluttering open, no longer human, but infused with the same ancient, knowing coldness I'd seen in Silas himself. He was curing her, but it wasn't a cure, it was a transformation. The vision snapped away, leaving me gasping for air, the phone still pressed to my ear. Silas's voice was calm again. "Are we clear, Vance?" I could only nod, tears blurring my vision, not just from fear, but from the horrifying truth of what I was carrying, and what Silas Thorne truly was. The ledger in my hand felt like a death warrant, and Clara's future, so nearly within reach, now felt impossibly far away, tangled in a web of unspeakable horror. The engine of old Bessie, which had been idling, gave a final, desperate cough and died, this time, completely. The absolute silence that followed was more chilling than any whisper. The engine died, not with a sputter this time, but with a final, definitive gasp, plunging the abandoned gas station into absolute suffocating silence. The last vestige of hope that perhaps I could restart old Bessie vanished with the fading hum. Rule number 3. Here it was. If the engine dies, pray for sunrise. My flashlight, dropped in the horror of Silas's phone call, lay forgotten on the trailer floor, its beam cutting a useless circle into the darkness. I stood there, trapped between the gaping maw of the opened trailer and the impenetrable blackness of Blood Hollow, the chill of the night seeping into my very bones. The phone slipped from my numb fingers, clattering onto the cracked asphalt. My gaze was fixed on the ledger still clutched in my hand, specifically on the name Silas Thorne and the blank space beside it. The chilling vision of Clara, Silas's daughter, receiving that dark cure replayed itself. This wasn't just a job, it was a ritual. I was not a driver. I was a delivery boy for something unspeakable. A shadow detached itself from the deeper shadows beneath the gas station canopy. It wasn't Silas Thorne at first. It was the woman in the stained wedding dress, Isolde, her form fluid, impossibly fast. She glided, not walked, her bare feet making no sound on the gravel. Her face, no longer contorted into that monstrous snarl, was still terrifyingly beautiful, pale, and unblemished, but her eyes held a cold, ancient hunger. She wasn't alone. From the tree line, moving with the same unnatural grace, came the boy in the Letterman jacket, Caleb, his face still etched with that desperate fear, but now his eyes glowed with an undeniable, internal ember. And behind them, a procession of other figures I hadn't seen before, all impossibly pale, their movements too swift, too silent. Then, from the darkness just beyond the old gas pumps, Silas Thorne emerged. He wasn't walking like the others. He moved like a man, but there was an unnatural tension in his shoulders, a subtle shift in his posture, as if he were holding himself back. His eyes, in the faint light, seemed to glint with a dark, satisfied triumph. He wasn't just my employer, he was one of them. The horrifying realization hit me with the force of a physical blow. "Silas," I whispered, my voice raw with disbelief and terror. He merely smiled, that thin, humorless smile, and gestured with a dismissive flick of his hand towards the figures behind him. "Vance, allow me to introduce some associates. And your cargo." Isolde and Caleb moved closer, their gazes fixed on me with an unsettling intensity. I could feel the cold radiating off them, a palpable aura of ancient predator. I scrambled backward, tripping over my own feet, my back hitting the cold, hard side of old Bessie's trailer. The coffins within felt like a mockery, a trap. Then, she stepped forward. She was older than the others, and the power she radiated was undeniable, suffocating. Her beauty was breathtaking, but utterly terrifying. A classical elegance marred by eyes that held the weight of centuries, dark pools that seemed to see into the very core of my soul. Her skin was alabaster, her hair the color of midnight, falling in elegant waves around a face that was both regal and utterly devoid of warmth. She wore a simple, dark gown that seemed to absorb the meager light. This was Morwenna, the name the old man had whispered. "Tell him about Morwenna." "Leo Vance." Her voice was like velvet over steel, a melodic whisper that somehow resonated in the dead silence of the night, carrying more authority than any shout. "Your desperation has served us well tonight." My breath hitched. "Who? What are you?" Morwenna took another slow, deliberate step closer. "We are what legends whisper about, Mr. Vance. What fear creates in the shadows. We are the Ancient Ones, and we require a steward, a keeper of our journeys." She gestured to the coffins with a graceful hand. "These are not mere coffins. They are our sanctuary. Within them lies the sacred soil of our native lands, the very earth that sustains us. Without it, beneath the sun, we are nothing." She paused, letting the truth sink in, letting the cold horror of it wash over me. "For centuries, we have required a driver, one who understands the necessity of discretion, the importance of these rules you so foolishly broke. One who, like yourself, is driven by a profound, desperate love." Her gaze flickered to Silas, a subtle nod between them. Silas here served us faithfully for many years. He chose to save his child, Ilara, just as you seek to save your Clara." My eyes darted to Silas, a fresh wave of understanding hitting me. He hadn't just dealt with them, he had joined them, or at least become their willing servant. His daughter's cure had been a transformation, a surrender to this darkness. "We saw your plight, Leo Vance," Morwenna continued, her voice soft, tempting. "We felt your sister's fading light. We can help her." She stretched out a hand, her slender fingers pale as moonlight. "Serve us, Leo, become our new steward. Find us others like yourself, desperate souls with burdens to bear, who will drive our precious cargo, and in return, we will cure Clara. Her cancer, gone. Her life, restored. Just as Ilara lives, free from the sickness that once plagued her. The offer hung in the air, a poisonous, irresistible balm. Cure Clara. Her face, her smile, so vibrant even through the pain. The relief, the sheer, unimaginable relief, warred with the utter revulsion, the horror of the price. Find victims for them? Be a part of this monstrous charade? You don't believe? Morwenna's voice cut through my thoughts, tinged with a hint of amusement. She snapped her fingers, and one of the other vampires, a withered, skeletal man, was instantly by her side. He looked almost mummified, his skin dry and papery, his eyes sunken and vacant. He looked like he hadn't fed in a long time. Morwenna bent down, speaking to him in a language I didn't understand, a guttural, ancient tongue that vibrated with power. The withered vampire, Gideon, raised his head slowly, his lifeless eyes fixing on me. And then, a dry, raspy whisper escaped his lips, thin as paper, but clear as a death knell in the silence of Blood Hollow. "Clara," my sister's name, uttered by a decaying monster. It was not a question, not a plea, but a statement of undeniable, terrifying knowledge. They knew her. They had access to her. They had the power to save her or to condemn her. The desperate bargain was no longer a negotiation. It was a choice between my soul and Clara's life, laid bare in the terrifying glow of the moon, under the watchful, hungry eyes of the Ancient Ones. Clara. The name, my sister's name, was a dry, papery whisper from the withered vampire Morwenna called Gideon. It hung in the air, a declaration of their power, a chilling testament to how deeply they could reach into my life. The offer, dripping with poisoned sweetness, coiled around me. Serve them, become a purveyor of human misery, and Clara would live. Ilara's vision, Silas's twisted cure flashed before my eyes. To save Clara by condemning countless others. To become a monster in human skin. My blood ran cold, but a spark, hot and defiant, ignited in my chest. This wasn't just about Clara's life anymore. It was about what kind of life she would have, what kind of man would be waiting for her at the end of it. The man I was, or the monster they wanted me to be. My gaze flickered between Morwenna's ancient, knowing eyes and the still-open trailer door, revealing the meticulously crafted coffins. Within them lies the sacred soil of our native lands, the very earth that sustains us. Without it, beneath the sun, we are nothing. Morwenna's own words, spoken mere moments ago, echoed in my mind. The earth that sustains them, their weakness, sunlight, and the soil, a desperate, insane idea, sharp as broken glass, pierced through the fog of terror. If the soil sustained them, what happened if it was released, desecrated? No, I choked out, the word a raw, defiant rasp against the velvet silence. My voice trembled, but the conviction behind it was iron. No, I won't do it. Silas took a step forward, his gaunt face hardening. Vance, don't be a fool. You saw what we can do. You heard Gideon. We know her. We can take her light. You already took yours, Silas, I spat, my eyes burning into his. "You sacrificed your soul for a twisted version of life. I won't do that to Clara." Morwenna's beautiful face tightened, a flicker of irritation crossing her ancient features. Such defiance, such predictable human weakness. "You choose death for your sister then, Leo Vance?" "I choose to fight." My words were a desperate roar, fueled by a sudden, exhilarating surge of adrenaline. Before any of them could react, before Morwenna could even complete her next silky threat, I lunged. Not for Silas, not for Morwenna, but for the open maw of the trailer. My target was the nearest coffin, the one I had just opened to reveal the ledger. My hands, slick with sweat, scrambled for purchase on the smooth, polished wood. It was heavier than it looked, anchored somehow. But desperation gave me superhuman strength. With a grunt that tore from my throat, I yanked, pushed, and twisted. The coffin shifted, groaning against its fastenings. The dark, sweet scent of the earth inside wafted out, rich and cloying. "What is he doing?" I heard Isolde snarl, her voice no longer soft, but a guttural hiss of rage. I ignored them. All my focus was on the coffin. I ripped at the ornate clasps, my fingers scrabbling, tearing at the wood. The solid lid finally gave way with a sickening, splintering sound, revealing the dark, rich soil packed within. It looked like ordinary dirt, but it hummed with an unseen, potent energy. This was it. This was their lifeblood. Massagrukwo. With another surge of primal strength, I flipped the coffin on its side. It was heavy, but the angled position allowed the contents to spill. A dark, earthy cascade poured out onto the grimy trailer floor. The sacred, life-sustaining soil, Morwenna's very life force, flowed across the metal, mixing with dust and grime. As the soil spilled, a piercing, unholy shriek ripped through the night. It was Isolde, the beautiful, spectral bride. She staggered back, her hands flying to her face, her body writhing in agony. The elegant white wedding dress seemed to shrivel, clinging to her suddenly shrinking form. Her skin, once alabaster, mottled and cracked like dried mud. Her hair thinned, falling in clumps. Her eyes, those cold, hungry depths, widened in horror and pain, her mouth stretching in a silent scream as her features began to distort, not into the snarl I'd seen in the mirror, but into something infinitely worse, rapid, agonizing decay. She was withering, shriveling before my eyes, turning into something brittle and desiccated, just like the ancient vampire Gideon. The very earth that sustained her was now denying her, abandoning her. The other vampires reacted instantly, their cold composure shattered. Caleb let out a strangled cry, a sound that was half human, half beast, his glowing eyes flaring with shock and fury. They surged forward, a collective growl rumbling through the night. Silas, his face a mask of shock and rage, let out an enraged roar. "Fool! You've doomed us all," he shrieked, pointing a trembling finger at me. But the chaos I had hoped for was real. The vampires, momentarily thrown into disarray by Isolde's agonizing collapse, hesitated, their focus, previously razor-sharp, splintered between their dying comrade and me, the desecrator. Morwenna, her face a mask of fury, moved with impossible speed, but she was too far to stop me. Joel Tadisa's was my chance. My eyes darted around, searching for anything, a weapon, a path. My gaze landed on the ground beside the truck. There, half buried in the gravel, lay a heavy, rusty tire iron, a desperate tool for a desperate man. In one fluid motion, born of pure instinct, I lunged for it. My fingers closed around the cold, heavy metal, its familiar weight a sudden comfort. I straightened, the tire iron now clutched in a white-knuckled grip, ready to swing. "Come on, you bastards!" I roared, the words sounding guttural and raw, a challenge to the ancient monsters surrounding me. I didn't wait for them. With the tire iron raised, I pivoted, not towards the open road, but towards the dark, welcoming maw of the forest. My legs pumped, propelling me into the undergrowth, crashing through the brittle branches and tangled vines. Behind me, Morwenna's voice, now stripped of its melodic allure, was a furious, chilling command that reverberated through the trees. "Get him! Do not let him escape!" The sounds of their pursuit were immediate. A flurry of impossibly fast footsteps, the rustle of leaves, and the hungry and enraged snarls of creatures denied their very essence. They were coming for me. And the night, though now filled with the taste of terror and adrenaline, still stretched endlessly ahead. The Appalachian forest swallowed me whole, a black, tangled labyrinth of ancient trees and thorny undergrowth. I ran like a man possessed, the rusty tire iron a cold, comforting weight in my sweating hand. Every snap of a twig, every rustle of leaves, sounded like the pursuit of 1,000 hungry wolves. Their snarls, filled with an ancient primal rage, echoed unnervingly close behind me. I could hear their impossibly swift movements, the soft thud of their feet on the damp earth, closing the distance. Panic was a cold, sharp blade, but a desperate clarity had settled over me. Running blindly wouldn't work. I knew these mountains, their deceptive dips and rises, their hidden ravines. I had to evade them, confuse them, buy myself time. My mind raced, replaying every whispered warning, every chilling encounter. If the engine dies, pray for sunrise. Silas's voice. The key was survival until dawn, but my truck was dead, and they were faster, stronger. I veered sharply, plunging into a dense thicket of rhododendrons, ignoring the tearing branches and the stinging scratches on my face and arms. I dropped to a low crouch, forcing my way through, my breath coming in ragged gasps. The vampires, accustomed to open ground or clear trails, would be momentarily slowed by the dense foliage. I heard their frustrated snarls, the tearing of their own clothes as they blundered through the thicket. An boa. It bought me precious seconds. I didn't stop, didn't rest. I continued to circle, using the terrain to my advantage, aiming to throw them off my scent. I imagined them, those pale, furious faces, their burning eyes fixed on my escape. Isolde, shriveling from the desecrated soil, her agony a desperate gamble that had paid off. It had bought me this moment, this desperate, terrifying chase. I moved with the instincts of a hunted animal, pushing my protesting lungs, my aching muscles. After what felt like an eternity, I could sense their pursuit faltering, growing more scattered. They were still out there, lurking, but their immediate, focused assault had been disrupted. I was still running, but I was no longer fleeing in a straight line. I was circling back. Back to old Bessie. Back to my dead truck. It was a risk, a monumental gamble, but it was the only option. I needed the truck, or at least its proximity, if I was to have any chance against the encroaching dawn. Finally, a faint, familiar outline emerged from the darkness. Old Bessie, a dark, hulking silhouette under the skeletal remains of the gas station canopy. Her engine was still silent, but the sight of her was a perverse comfort. I stumbled out of the woods, gasping for breath, my legs burning. And then I saw him. Silas Thorne was there, standing by the truck, his back to me. His shoulders slumped. He looked broken. Not angry, not triumphant, but utterly defeated. The fury I'd seen in his eyes when I spilled the soil had drained away, replaced by a profound, terrible emptiness. He wasn't looking for me. He was just staring into the darkness, a figure of profound sorrow. Man Mahat. I raised the tire iron instinctively, my heart hammering. Was this a trap? Was he waiting to finish me? Man Mahat. He turned slowly, as if he felt my presence more than heard it. His eyes, in the faint moonlight, were no longer cold or triumphant. They were haunted. And they looked at me with a recognition that chilled me to the bone, not of an enemy, but of a reflection. "Vance," he rasped, his voice devoid of its earlier malice, a mere shadow of its former self. You actually did it." "You want to finish me, Silas?" I asked, my voice shaky, but my grip on the tire iron firm. He shook his head, a slow, weary gesture. No, I don't. He stepped closer, and I instinctively braced myself. But he wasn't moving to attack. He reached into his pocket, his hand emerging with a familiar glint of metal. It was a Zippo lighter, an old-fashioned chrome one. Why? I demanded, my brow furrowed in confusion. Because I remember, he said, his gaze distant, his voice laced with a bitter self-loathing. I remember being you, desperate, willing to do anything. She offered me the same choice, to save Alara, and I took it. His eyes flickered back to me, a painful mirroring of my own desperation. I sacrificed everything, my soul, others, to keep her alive. But it's not life, Vance. It's a gilded cage, a monstrous existence. He held out the Zippo. This is the way out. I hesitated, distrust warring with a fragile flicker of hope. What are you talking about? The fuel line, he whispered, his voice thin but urgent. It's cut. You need to repair it, enough to get you here. He pointed towards a distant peak, barely visible above the tree line. Beyond that ridge, there's a valley. Old Man Hemlock's farm. The sun, it always hits there first. A few minutes, but crucial minutes. He pushed the Zippo into my hand, his fingers surprisingly cold. You spill the fuel, Vance, and you light it, right at the crest of the hill. It won't stop them all, but it'll buy you time. Time enough for the dawn, time enough for Clara. The rustling in the woods grew louder, closer. I heard the distinct snarl of Caleb, a furious, predatory sound. They were closing in. Silas turned his back on me, his gaze fixed on the tree line. His shoulders squared. He looked fragile, but there was a new, grim resolve in his eyes. Silas, what are you doing? I gasped, realizing his intent. Buying you time, he said, a ghost of a smile touching his lips. It was the first genuine smile I'd seen from him, a sad, weary acceptance. My redemption, Vance. You go. For Clara. For yourself. Don't be me. The first vampire burst from the trees, a blur of motion, directly towards Silas. He didn't flinch. He simply stood his ground, a lone, gaunt figure against the encroaching darkness, sacrificing himself to give me the precious minutes I needed. The air filled with a furious roar, a desperate scream, and then the sickening thud of impact. Ooh, I didn't look back. The image of Silas, broken but resolute, sacrificing himself, burned in my mind. With the Zippo clutched in one hand and the tire iron in the other, I scrambled towards the front of old Bessie, my fingers already fumbling for the severed fuel line, praying that Silas's last, desperate act would be enough, praying for sunrise. Silas Thorne's final, guttural scream still echoed in my ears as I scrambled beneath old Bessie. The scent of spilled fuel was sharp, metallic, mingling with the coppery tang of fear and something else, something that spoke of fresh, violent sacrifice. His decision, his terrible, beautiful act of redemption, burned into my memory, a flicker of humanity in the face of insurmountable evil. He'd bought me time. I had to make it count. So, my fingers, numb with cold and shaking with adrenaline, fumbled for the severed fuel line. It was mangled, a jagged tear near the tank. Impossible to truly fix, not out here, not with them closing in. But Silas had said, enough to get you. Here. Enough to reach that distant valley where the sun would strike first. I ripped a strip of cloth from my shirt, tied it tightly around the torn line, then wrapped it again with a piece of electrical tape I found in my toolkit. It was a makeshift repair, a prayer more than a solution, but it was all I had. The precious diesel dripped from the hasty bandage, a slow, steady leak onto the ground. Every drop was a ticking clock. I scrambled back into the cab, slamming the door shut. My hands trembled on the ignition. "Come on, Bessie," I pleaded, my voice raw. The engine coughed, a desperate, rattling sound. Then again, and again. Finally, with a strained groan, it caught, idling roughly, shuddering like a dying heart. It was a miracle, a fragile, leaking miracle. I jammed the truck into gear, the tires spitting gravel as old Bessie lurched forward. I didn't look back at the gas station, didn't dare glance into the mirrors. My gaze was fixed on the road ahead, a desperate tunnel through the oppressive darkness, illuminated only by the struggling headlights. The terrain was steep, winding, the treacherous curves of the Appalachian road intensified by my frantic pace and the fear clawing at my throat. Old Bessie groaned, protesting every incline, every sharp turn. The fuel gauge, already hovering near empty, seemed to plummet with alarming speed as the makeshift repair leaked steadily onto the asphalt behind me, leaving a glistening, dark trail. The sounds of pursuit, dulled by the closed windows and the roaring engine, were still there. Faint screams of rage, the impossible swiftness of their approach. They were gaining. I pushed the rig harder, my foot pressed to the floor, my muscles screaming in protest. The road blurred, the trees a dark, rushing wall on either side. Minutes stretched into an eternity. The ridge. Silas had pointed to a distant peak, told me to go beyond it, to a valley. I drove with single-minded focus, every nerve ending screaming. The engine coughed again, a hacking, desperate sound. The truck swayed violently, the fuel line repair protesting, spraying more diesel onto the road. Encherceria. I saw it then, the crest of the hill, barely 100 yards away. A faint, almost imperceptible lightening of the sky, a hint of deep, bruised purple in the east. Dawn. It was coming. Then, just as I started the final ascent, old Bessie gave a final rattling shudder. The engine coughed once more, a death rattle, and died. Completely. The sudden silence was deafening. The only sound, the furious beating of my own heart. The truck rolled to a stop, just short of the crest, her nose pointing towards the distant, hidden valley. I was so close, too close. I saw them then, emerging from the darkness behind me, a tide of furious, pale faces. Morwenna, her beauty marred by a terrifying rage, led the charge. Caleb, his glowing eyes burning with vengeance. The remaining figures, their snarls echoing through the stillness. They were almost upon me. Harris, there was no more running, no more driving. This was it. The final stand. My eyes darted around the cab, then to the Zippo still clutched in my hand. Silas's last gift. His last instruction. You spill the fuel, Vance, and you light it. Right at the crest of the hill. The truck was dead, but the fuel line was leaking. A river of highly flammable diesel snaked its way down the incline behind me, a dark, glistening trail leading directly to them. Morwenna's eyes, fixed on me, narrowed with a chilling anticipation. You cannot escape, Leo Vance, she hissed, her voice a predatory whisper. The sun rises, but you will not see it. I looked at her, then at the Zippo. My hand, which had trembled earlier, was suddenly steady. Clara's face, vibrant and alive, flashed through my mind. And Silas, buying me this final chance. Maybe not, I yelled back, my voice hoarse but strong. But neither will you. With a roar born of desperation and defiance, I hurled the lit Zippo lighter with all my might. It arced through the pre-dawn gloom, a tiny, fiery comet, landing squarely on the glistening trail of diesel fuel just yards from Morwenna and the others. The effect was instantaneous. A whoosh, then a blinding whir that shook the very ground. The leaking diesel ignited with explosive force, sending a wall of fire erupting down the hill. Old Bessie, already saturated with fuel from the continuous leak, became a massive, roaring inferno. The heat was immense, blasting against the truck, shattering glass, searing the air. Screams, not human, but ancient and raw, ripped through the night. Vampires, caught in the sudden, searing blaze, thrashed in agony. Several of them, engulfed by the firestorm, writhed, their forms contorting, before dissolving into ash and smoke, their unholy lives consumed by the inferno. Morwenna and a few others, quicker or luckier, staggered from the immediate blast radius, their clothes singed, their faces twisted into masks of furious, frustrated rage. They were still alive, still coming, their eyes blazing with a renewed, murderous intent. They lunged, their movements still impossibly fast, but now tinged with a desperate, wounded ferocity. But as they advanced, a sliver of brilliant, undeniable gold pierced the bruised purple of the eastern sky. A single, triumphant ray of sunlight breaking over the distant mountain peak, washing over the valley below, and creeping, inexorably, up the side of the hill. Morwenna, her eyes widening in a sudden, dawning horror, looked up. The first ray of direct sunlight touched her alabaster skin. She cried out, a sound of pure agony and despair. Smoke curled from her flesh. She staggered, stumbled, her beautiful features twisting into a rictus of unimaginable pain. Without the protection of their sacred soil, caught fully in the cleansing light of the dawn, the ancient ones began to disintegrate. Caleb, who had been charging, clawed at his face as the sun touched his glowing eyes. He shrieked, his body crumbling from the feet up. One by one, the remaining vampires, caught exposed on the hillside, withered and evaporated, their ancient forms dissolving into dust and fine, gray ash that blew away on the first morning breeze. Morwenna stood for a terrifying moment longer, her eyes fixed on me, hatred and agony burning in their depths, before she too finally succumbed. She dissolved, a silent, terrible crumble of dust, leaving behind only the ghost of her terrifying beauty. The roaring inferno of old Bessie burned on, a cleansing pyre against the emerging dawn. I stood there leaning against the smoking hulk of my truck, gasping for breath, my body aching, my mind reeling. The air, no longer heavy with ancient dread, smelled of smoke and pine and the fresh, clean promise of a new day. The sun rose fully, bathing the valley in golden light. I watched it, tears streaming down my grimy face. I was alone, exhausted, but alive. And somewhere, in a hospital room far away, Clara still had a chance. I had faced the darkness, and I had survived.